coffee. Coffee is the #1 tip I have for passing the test. Hey everyone, this video is brought to you by my new sponsor, Gas Station Coffee. If you're on the run, you might as well have the runs. That's obviously a joke, but I have recently partnered with the Superior School of Real Estate.
Wow.
So if you have not signed up for real estate classes yet, or need to go to post-licensing or continuing education or anything else, I will have links down in the description below, and I get a little bitty itty piece of the money that they get if you use those links. Anyway, that is step 1 to actually passing the test. Is first you need to sign up for classes, but let's get on to the real stuff. I've been getting comments, emails, and Facebook messages with the 3 same questions, so I think it's about time I start making videos around these because it's clearly needed. The first question I get a lot of is, my exam is next week, do you have any tips to pass? That's what we'll cover mostly here today. Another question I get a lot of is, I passed the national part but not the state portion. What can I do to finally pass the state part? We won't cover too much of that in this video, that will be a future video, but I do have a tip on that at the end here. Then various questions about what people should do after they pass the test, like what are some questions they should ask their brokerage, what should they look for in a brokerage, and even how do you pick up some of the leads, which I'm really not going to cover too much at all in this video, but I will have a future video out on that. Or you can just reach out to me in the comments here below, or again, email, Facebook messaging has been working pretty well too. So I'm going to go very broad in this video for the most part, and this should help lead you in the general direction of where you should be focusing. I may dig into a few really specific points, but for the most part, bigger picture. Starting with the tried and true, you must study chapter 7 and 11. 7-Eleven like the gas station. If you have a different book for whatever reason, chapter 7 is on brokerage relationships. This is like, what is agency? How are agency relationships made? Clients versus customers, fiduciary duties, what we disclose, like material facts and things. What is first substantial contact? And that is a huge one. That's like, when do we provide the brochure for them? The Working with Real Estate's brochure. When to use that brochure. Misrepresentation versus omissions, and so on. Chapter 7 has 21 questions alone on just this one chapter. It's extremely important. 21 questions out of 120 questions is over 10% from just one chapter. Then chapter 11, which is all about real estate financing, is extremely important as well. And although there's only about 11 or 12 questions on the test from this chapter, there's a ton of information in here across a broad spectrum of topics that you'll need to know, and it'll cover some other chapters as well within this chapter. And that's the point, is to gather as much information in one place as you can about the entire test. Here you're going to want to know the different types of loans, like the difference between conventional and FHA and VA, and what's required of VA loans. And this is actually really great when you become a real broker, unlike 90% of this other garbage you learn. Then you'll want to know how to figure out how to calculate the discount points and the math around the interest rates, which I'll go into a lot of the math here in a little bit later in this video. Chapter 11 also contains things like the clauses, like the acceleration clause, the defeasance clause, know what title states versus lien states even means, trust deeds versus mortgages, foreclosure information and short sale information, the primary market versus the secondary market, TRID, which is where TILA and RESPA are, and definitely the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Don't write anything that I just said down. The point of this whole thing is to really make sure that you focus on chapter 11, study it through and through, or whatever the real estate financing chapter is in your book. My advice would be then to make sure chapter 11 is one of the very last things you see and study before walking through the doors to take your exam. Study it early on, obviously, but then make that one of your last chapters that really gets into your short-term memory of your brain before you go take that test. Outside of those, look at chapter 8 and chapter 9. Again, a lot of the information in those 2 chapters covers a lot of ground across like chapter 2 and chapter 3. So again, if you're looking for a lot of ground to cover with just a few chapters, 8 and 9 will be there as well. Plus, those have a lot of state-heavy parts in it. These are agency contracts and basic contract law chapters. So for those of you taking this class through the Superior School of Real Estate, they actually give you this adventure guide here which has all of these slides that you can write notes next to. And honestly, this is more than enough information to study to be able to be successful on this exam without having to read the entire textbook. I can't tell you, and I probably shouldn't tell you, how many textbook chapters I actually skipped and just skimmed through this, even with how big of a real estate nerd I am. I literally browsed through the adventure guide 2 or 3 times leading up to the final days before my exam, and that was enough without reading some of the chapters in the book. But please continue to watch these videos. Most of you are going to hate me for this next tip, but I'm really telling you how to set yourself up for success on this tricky exam. Okay, so does anybody know if this test will have a question on, does a listing agreement need to be in writing? Does anyone know if this test will ask what the difference is between universal, general, and special agents? What about the benefits of a 1031 tax exchange? Nobody knows except for the people who wrote those questions. What I can tell you though with 99% confidence is that there will be specific questions around each and every type of math problem. I know you all hate math, right? There will be a question on excise tax. There will be a question on how to calculate your commission. There will be debt equity ratio questions, and there will be questions on how to comp your home or figure out the remaining taxes that need to be paid at the end of the year. What I am saying is, if you know how to do each one of these different types of math problems, it's a sure way to get 100% on these parts of the exam because you 100% know that they're gonna be on it. You can spend 30 minutes trying to memorize all of the rules around timeshares and hope that that part will be on the test. Or you could spend 30 minutes focusing on how to calculate excise tax and mark it off after you nail it on the test, because you know it's going to be on there. For future proof that this is a benefit, timeshares are in Chapter 2, where they state that only 5 test questions will come from. Chapter 2 also has condo information and about 100 other different types of topics on there. Really, flip through it and see how many things are covered within just that one chapter, with only 5 test questions coming from it. Again, spend 30 minutes on any one of these 100 topics and it might be on the test, or spend 30 minutes on a math problem that you know will be covered. Plus, knowing this math actually helps you in the real world as an agent, while knowing what joint tenancy is rarely comes into occurrence and does very little to benefit your life. Just saying. Another little tip or trick is to mark the questions that you do not know for sure and then come back to it later on, and hear me out. When you can't quite pick an answer, mark the ones off that you know for sure are not right, and then flag, star, circle whatever the question is and come back to it later on. If you're on the computer taking this exam, there's actually a little flag or a star button somewhere in the corner so you can come back to it later on. Future questions on this same test that you're taking, questions that come up later on this test, can possibly answer some of the previous questions that you had trouble on. This seriously helped me switch 3 or 4 of my answers on this test, and I actually just did this on my post-licensing exam I took back in June. I didn't read a single piece of material from that post-licensing exam, by the way, so if you're worried about taking your courses, it's extremely easy. You just gotta wiggle your mouse for about 30 minutes. But this tactic here literally just helped me on this post-licensing. So I'm gonna provide you an example of what I'm talking about. So let's say question 3 says, a deed in lieu of foreclosure conveys a title to which of the following? A lender, a borrower, a trustee, or a mortgagor? So in this case, you might be like, shoot, I don't know, is it lender or is it mortgager? Is it A or is it D? You cross off B and C if you know for sure that those are not correct, and then move on with the test. So a little bit later, we come across question 18. Once the title conveys back to the lender after foreclosure, what happens next? House is sold at an auction. Borrower can submit an application to get it back. Borrower can sue. Borrower must live on the streets and sell crack to survive. So none of these answers really matter, and I made the answers up. But look at this question carefully. Once the title conveys back to the lender after foreclosure, it answered question 3, so let's go back to that. A deed in lieu of foreclosure conveys a title to which of the following? Well, it conveys back to a lender, as we just saw in 18. Now, not everyone has the memory of an elephant. By the time you get to chapter 18, number 3 is cleared your mind. But here's what happens. You read question 3, you can't quite figure it out, so you move on. Then you come to question 18. And so maybe during question 18, you put 2 and 2 together. You might not, but maybe you do, and then you go back to question 3 and you answer it. If you don't put 2 and 2 together right away, eventually once you loop back around the test to answer those questions that you left alone, that you had flagged or starred, you'll see question 3 and your mind may trigger, hey, this actually seems like it's going to be lender. I feel like I just read that somewhere. Now for the national versus state portion, this can be really tricky because this information is just spread out through the entire book. There's no one place to really gather all of this material. What I will say on this now until I make a future video on the real differences is don't think that just because these are two different tests, the national and the state, that the answers are going to be different by nature. Most of the questions are actually just duplicates or near duplicates of the other tests. Our state rules align with the federal rules in many ways. I remember taking the state portion immediately after taking the national, and I was like, I literally just answered this question 30 minutes ago. Just remember, the answers, I would argue anyways, are most likely the same. Don't think that just because they're two different tests means that the answers are going to be different. If you want to dive further into the state portion, chapters 7, 8, and 10, all around law and basic contracts and things like that, will help you dive deeper into just the state portions of this test. Then there's Appendix C, which you can actually find online or in the back of your textbook, which will really dive in deep to the state portions too. It's called the North Carolina Real Estate Licensing Law. Next, just to dive into a couple of really specific points here, because these subjects have been highlighted as test probable. So the government does not enforce CC&Rs or the covenants and restrictions. Those are like neighborhood disputes and rules, right? That is not a government thing. That's your neighbor suing you to take action, basically. So remember the 5 rules with timeshare, the 5 rule, 5 for 5. Any answer that has 5 in it when you have a test question around timeshares, go with one that has 5 on there. Getting married doesn't change form of ownership. Each section in a township is 640 acres. Septic tanks dictate the amount of bedrooms, not bathrooms. Brokers work for clients. We work with customers. First substantial contact is when you start talking about needs with the person on buying or selling. And you know what? There's actually way too many things here to go through right now. I've been considering making a cram session series, so I may just do that. I'm going to leave that out of this here. This just needs to be a broad how to pass a test. I can't give you 1,000 bullet points. But subscribe so you make sure you don't miss that. I'm thinking about 5-minute videos, no introductions, no ads, just straight to the point. And just to cover the last frequent question I get from all of you about what do I do after I pass the exam, go ahead and watch my how to choose a brokerage or a firm linked somewhere up here in the corner, or you can check it out in the description or back on my channel. I will be releasing a video on why I specifically chose Keller Williams and why I have never second guessed my decision. If you have any more questions on that, go ahead and drop them down in the comments below or shoot me over an email. If you decide to join Keller Williams, then we could be really awesome referral partners, which means if I have a buyer looking in your area or a seller, I can send them your way. You vice versa, anywhere in the country. But additionally, put me down as a sponsor. It's a really important part of the Keller Williams culture, and it would mean a lot to me. I think I covered just about everything here, but my last piece of advice is to think about all of these things logically. Just step back a little bit, really think it through. Everything except for the fair housing rules, really. Fair housing has rules that state things like you can't write houses in walking distance of things because some people can't walk. But then I don't get why beautiful views isn't a violation because some people can't see. Or maybe we should no longer be able to say large bathrooms because some people are 8 and 9 feet tall and to them it would be a small bathroom. Basically, use logic across this entire exam until you get to the fair housing. In the fair housing sections, just think like a good human should think. Treat everyone with respect, equality, and dignity just like you should in the real world. On that very serious note, please, please, please drop some comments down below with any other questions that you have. Whether it's on this exam or it's about joining a brokerage or putting me down as a sponsor, drop any tips or things that you'd like to see in future videos. Lastly, subscribe so you can see more videos when they do come out. I'll see you on the next one. Good luck.